Hello, welcome back to the next podcast. Today is all about the lies we tell ourselves, called the imposter syndrome, the coach's nightmare. It's a good one, right?
It is a good one. And it's not, let's be honest, it's not just the coach's nightmare. It's the world's nightmare. How many people in how many jobs have feelings of imposter syndrome? High percentage, I would imagine. I haven't done the research, but I'm guessing it's a high percentage.
I haven't done the research,
people.
but I'm guessing.
Yeah. The thing is, so many people talk about it, and they talk about it as like this mysterious thing. Because it's called a syndrome, nobody knows what a syndrome really is, do they? A syndrome's just a fancy word. It's just one of these words. Yeah, it just kind of sits there as if to say, sounds kind of serious, but I don't really know. That's what syndrome, I think, means. It sounds kind of serious, but I don't really know. That's what a syndrome is. And people think, oh, I've got this imposter syndrome, therefore it must be serious. And I heard it described recently as a cultural phenomenon. Imposter syndrome is a cultural phenomenon. And I kind of went, oh, okay, it's a cultural phenomenon now. So, Cuddy, tell me, what's your views? What's imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome for me is the feeling of not being in the right place and really know what I'm doing. And it's easy to say that I've got imposter syndrome, so I can't do something.
Okay, so if I put my coaching hat on just for a second, because that's what we do,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to dig a little bit deeper. So what actually is imposter syndrome underneath that?
It's a fear of not being good enough.
Yeah.
I have a fear of not being good enough, and I'm going to create a label or something else that stops me being who I need to be. Because it's easier to say I've got a label and I've got something to wear than actually say, all right, I'm aware that I don't really know what I'm doing at this moment in time, but I'm going to give it a go. I'll get a client. I'll go through anxiety, stress, or depression, knowing I've got the tools, and then we'll try and, what's the word? Get out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
Get over the fear of, at one point in my life, I'm going to have to do something. Otherwise, I'm going to stay stuck and not be the person I'm supposed to be.
And the trouble is with imposter syndrome is it is one of those, it's connected to those beliefs, and it holds us back. It stops us.
Yeah.
We're doing something that we don't feel comfortable doing because it doesn't feel like we should be doing that, and therefore it holds us back. It stops us. It goes, well, you shouldn't really be doing that, should you? And it's whether it's good enough or enough in general. So it could be that I'm not smart enough. It could be that I've not taken enough courses, or I haven't got enough experience, or I haven't done enough client practice, or I'm not deserving enough or worthy enough of being in this place. And that's what really creates imposter syndrome, isn't it?
Have you ever had imposter syndrome, Graham?
So about coaching, honestly, I haven't. But in previous job roles, absolutely. I remember many, many years ago, I started with a new business, and I started out as a trainee. And after 6 months, they were that impressed with me that they gave me this new grandiose title, which at the time seemed very grandiose to me. They gave me a rather nice pay rise, considering I was still relatively young at the time. And they said, right, this is the job and the title you're going to have. We're going to give you this money behind it. And I remember walking out at the end of the day and phoning my parents and telling them kind of to celebrate, to say, look, I've had this pay rise. Isn't it great? I've done this. And then I told them the title. And as per one particular member of my parents said, are you sure you can do that? And that was like, that was like, just letting every ghost in my past from Are You Sure, that horrible place in your past called Are You Sure, come out. All the ghosts come flooding out. So at that point, for the next 3 years while I was in that job, I didn't feel like I should be in that job. I just went in every day, did the best I possibly could, and hoped that it was good enough. but I didn't feel like I should be there because I was still relatively young. I mean, I was early 20s at this point. My parents still had a big influence on my life at this point, as parents do at that point in your life. As much as we hate to admit it, they do. So I felt like an imposter in that role for a long, long time. And it actually ended up me being made redundant out of that role, which didn't help at all because you start, see, you shouldn't have had it in the first place. That was kind of where my head went, you know? So, yes. What about yourself? Have you had imposter syndrome?
Have I had imposter syndrome?
Now, ladies and gentlemen, can you see the cogs whirring in Cuddy's mind?
Because I want to be honest. No. Have I had feelings of what am I doing? And this is absolutely mental. Yes. Do I then get feelings of, or do I then get the conversation, just keep going, just keep going? Yes, you failed in the past, but the best thing you can do is fail and learn, fail and learn, fail and learn. The unfortunate part of success is the failure. And it's the failure and learning from the failure that creates the success. There's going to be a lot of failure. You have to make that your best friend. The second you realize that's your best friend and you can learn from it, and it's okay to have that, maybe those feelings of imposter syndrome, I'm not going to be able to do this, I can't do this. I mean, it is just a change in language, isn't it? I can't do this, I should have done this, I can do this, I'm going to do this. The second we have that mindset shift, that's when things start to happen. And the scariest part of when you're new into coaching, it's going to be, I don't know what I'm doing for a while. You can do as much courses, you can get as many accreditations, you can get as many letters after your name. Doesn't mean anything until you can say, I've had clients. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody in the world can say, I'm a coach.
Yeah.
It's that easy. And I remember, and I'll talk to my friend who's an ILM coach, John Drysdale. And me and John Drysdale say it's the easiest thing in the world to get an accreditation to be a coach. But a lot of people can say I'm a business coach, or I'm a mind management coach, or I'm a life coach. A lot of people can say that.
Yeah.
It's only when they've got clients you can probably say, do you know what? I'm actually a coach. And people will always be able to tell the difference between someone that says they're the coach and someone who is actually a coach, because there'll be a difference. There'll be a different in vibration.
Yeah. I always relate it back to many, many years ago, a friend of mine decided he wanted to be a heavy goods vehicle, HGV driver.
Mm-hmm.
So he went and spent a lot of money because back then, and I'm sure it's more now, but back then I think it cost him something like 1,800 quid to get the lessons, to go through the test and all that sort of stuff. And I remember the day he passed the test, and he gave me a call and said, yes, I've passed the test. I've got my license. And I said, fantastic. When are you starting the job then? And his words were, just because I've passed the test doesn't mean I'm a HGV driver.
Ooh.
And I went, huh? And they kind of in, because it's like going and driving a car. My daughter last October, passed her driving test. Did that mean she could drive? No. Yes, she could drive legally on the road, but the experience she's gained since then, she's a much better driver now than she was by then.
Yeah.
In 5 years' time, the experience she'll have gained, she'll be an even better driver, hopefully. But that's how we do stuff. We don't just pass a course or take a course and get a certificate and we are that already. I mean, whether that's coaching or driving or becoming a doctor. Just because a doctor gets a degree does not mean that the first time he sits down with a patient, he's a properly qualified doctor. Yes, he might have the qualifications, but he needs the experience beyond it of dealing with people, of dealing with awkward people who come in, sick people that come in. He'll see things that he's only learnt about in books that he hasn't actually seen physically. We have to get experience. And I think it's something you talk about with our PMM coaches a lot. People don't buy the certifications.
Nope.
You walk into a business or you're sitting with an individual.
Yep.
they do not sit there and go, so tell me, what qualifications do you have and what certifications do you have?
Nope.
They say two things. Can you help me? And
Yep.
what experience have you got of helping me?
Correct.
And you've got the experience. You've got the experience in corporate America, so you can go in and deal with the big corporations.
Yes.
And that gives you that level of credibility that you wouldn't have if you just walked in and said, "Look, I've got a shiny new certificate
that I paid
it's
£7 from Facebook."
Yeah. Nothing.
I'm a fully certified life coach and NLP coach. I've just paid £7 for the certificate, and now I'm a coach.
I think I know the advert you're talking about because I've seen it at the moment as well.
I've seen it. Because that's what always makes me laugh when I have a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm a life coach." Brilliant. How much you pay for that? Tenner. Fantastic. Well done. So, two things. I'll always remember what my dad said to me the second I passed my driving test. "Well done, son. You've passed your driving test. Come out with me. Now I'll show you how to drive." I was like, "What?"
Absolutely.
He went, "No, you've passed your test. You can't drive. Come with me. I'm going to learn you how to drive now. Couldn't do it before because you had to pass your test. Now I'm going to teach you how to drive." And I always remember that. And some of the things that my dad told me then, I've passed on so many more times than anything I learned from a driver's license. And I'm going to share it there what it was. It was when we were driving out in fog. The beams were on and I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see the road because it was too foggy. And my dad always said, because it was a HGV driver, he went, "Right, you can't see the road now. It's night time. You need to watch the side of the road. You need to watch the hedge. That's now you're not watching straight on. You're keeping that part of the car away from the hedge." And I still, at 46, whenever I get fog, look down at the side of the road. Right, that's my edge. I'm not looking there. I'm keeping an eye on both. And I always remember that, and I pass that on to everybody because that was more useful than anything I'd learned on my driving test. And the second part is that imposter syndrome popping up. That story that you said got me one of my first contracts as a coach. Coaching executives. Never once to ask me why should I listen to you? Literally, that was the first response. The owner of the company said, "Can you work with my 4 senior leaders?" I said, "Yeah, not a problem, absolutely." As a mind management coach, and he said, "Right, perfect, not a problem." The two of them, there was 4 of them. 2 of them were really resistant, and they both said the same thing: "Why should I listen to you?" And I said, "Yeah, no, fair play." Never once did they ask. They just said, "Why should I listen to you?" I went, "Well, I had 135 staff. I had 9 senior managers. We took cruise ships from Texas to Singapore. We did it quite easily. Plus, we had a captain to report to and all these kind of things." And the second I told them what my experience was, opened up. "Right, you get what I'm going through. As long as you get what I'm going through, not a problem at all." Which is what we tell the coaches: people pay for experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to take you back to something you said when I asked you, "Had you ever had imposter syndrome?"
Yes.
And you said something along the lines of, "No, I don't think I have. Yes, I've had the feeling sometimes of I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll keep going anyway." So for me, somebody who might be listening to this might be going, "But that's imposter syndrome," because they've labeled that as imposter syndrome. You didn't label it as imposter syndrome.
Right.
If I'm honest, the story I told about when I was in my 20s and that, I look at it now and I could label it imposter syndrome. But at the time, I wasn't thinking, "Oh, this is imposter syndrome," because I don't think it had been created at that point. I don't think the label had been created when so many years ago. But you didn't label it as imposter syndrome. So the question then sits, is imposter syndrome just another label?
I think so. I think it's another. Look. We always stick to the basics when it comes to our fears. Not good enough. Simplify it. Not good enough. Not worthy. Not lovable. Those are the fears. They're the real stories, and we create those stories to cover those up. We listen to the language of the fear, but that's generally what we're working with. The 3 C's. So imposter syndrome is just another one that pops up. "Oh, I'm just a perfectionist. I can't start because it's got to be perfect." Nope. You might as well just say I've got another label. Nope. "Oh, everything's got to be just right." Nope. That's not real. That's not real.
No, because if you're waiting for the right time, it ain't ever going to show up.
And I remember that you're never going to feel ready. You just have to say yeah. And in fact, the first time I got cruise director, I got the email, I got the phone call. Right, Cuddy, we're flying you out. And it was 2 weeks of meditation, calming the conversation. Got on the flight, got into the thing. I had a few days handover, and I was acknowledging that the worry and the upset that I was causing myself was going to go away. I was doing my meditations to get through it. And the second I did the Welcome Aboard show, which was the first presentation, I just settled into it. And I was like, right, we're there. We've done it. We got the hard part. We now know what we're doing. Those feelings still came up. It's not like I was cold as ice the whole time, keeping calm. No, absolutely not. I was aware, meditated, calm my breath, got myself into a relaxed state, and just, do you know what I did, Graham? I shut up. I actually shut up and just listened. The only way, because I knew I didn't know what I was doing, was I'll shut up because all these people technically know more than me around me. And the best way for me to learn is if I'm talking, I'm not listening. If I'm talking, I'm not learning. I'm the one that's teaching. And sometimes you just have to shut up and listen and learn. And that will probably get you past your imposter syndrome a lot quicker.
Yeah. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because the imposter syndrome comes from the preconception that people have, the presupposition they have that they should know everything straight away.
Yeah, no, it's not going to happen.
And it's never going to happen. You know, I've been coaching for 20 years now, and I certainly don't know everything. I can create something new. I can learn something new almost on a daily basis. So you're never going to know everything. There's always going to be a client that sits in front of you that's something completely different to that you've never dealt with before. There's always going to be a different challenge if you're training a group of clients, or if you're training a group of business people, or you're training a group of kids. There's always going to be something different pop up that you never dealt with before that you have to learn to get over. That doesn't mean you're an imposter in that situation. It just means you haven't dealt with it before. Yep. And there's loads of stuff that we've never dealt with before. You know, when you first learn to ride a bike, you don't know how to ride a bike properly. Does that mean you're an imposter on that bike? No, it just means you need to learn how to ride a bike. You know, whatever it is, you need to learn first. So don't assume that you should know it straight away. Coaches think, and I've spoken to so many coaches who say, well, I haven't got my life together. How can I help somebody else? You don't have to have your life together. I don't have my life together. Absolutely 100%. I don't. I'm you know, there's not too many people in the world that have their life together. All you need to have to be a coach is to be one step further forward than the person you're coaching. That's it. One step, and help them catch up. Once they've caught up, they can move on. If you're 5 steps ahead of them, help them catch up with you, because you're always moving forward, so they might not do. The truth is, you don't have to have your life sorted. You just need to know something that client doesn't know.
Yeah.
And then you can help them.
So, for any first-time coaches, I'm sure we've talked about this before, but I think what did you do with your first? How did you know you're like, right, I'm going to do my first client. I've got to do my first client. I know what was in the back of my head when I took my first client. And I don't know if I got it from you or if I got it from somebody else, but because I'm a coach and not a therapist and not a counselor, I was under what was under my impression, they're not going to come to me and leave in any worse state. Even if I move them 1 inch forward, we've moved them forward. And that's with anxiety, stress, depression, whatever you coach.
Yeah.
I remember my first client was a very young lady, and I only did cognitive behavioral therapy at that time. I didn't do anything else. And I remember the cognitive behavioral therapy coach book said, oh, you might have to do 20 sessions with a person. We've talked about this. I was like, I'm not doing 20 sessions with somebody. That's ludicrous. So I sold her no, I didn't sell her. No, it was free. I said, look, we'll do 4 sessions and we'll see if we can get you moving forward. And I think I was really open and honest. I said, look, I'm quite new to it. So this is like a journey for both of us. Is that all right with you? Absolutely fine. She was like, yeah, totally understand. I really appreciate that. And we made the breakthrough. I think it was the 3rd session. And I'll tell you what, if I did have imposter syndrome, I'll tell you when it popped up was when I gave him a challenge to do, and I didn't hear from him for a week. And that week was purgatory, because I'm like, what if they don't do it? What if something? I mean, that's what popped up for me as the first time. And then when I come back to that session, I took a breath and I'm like, right, tell me how you got on. Oh, Cuddy, this worked. This is fantastic. I'm like, yes, right, boom. Let's do the next part. Let's do the next part. But that I remember the first week, I was like, do I text them? Do I like say, no, give them the space. They've been given a challenge. They'll come back. They can either can do it or can't do it, and we'll find out what they can't do, and then we'll put a plan in place. So I remember that. So who was your first client, and how did you pluck up the courage to go ahead and do the first client?
So my first client was a client that was recommended to me. It was a friend of a friend of a friend or something. I didn't know him, but it was within my friend's realms. And I remember, I mean, this was way, way before the days of video calling and that sort of stuff. And he lived quite a way away, so we agreed to do some telephone coaching. And I remember it so clearly because I'd been on courses. I'd been away for a weekend course and I'd done this course and my first life coaching course was a distance learning course. But before video courses, they used to send me the pamphlets in the post and I had to read them through and do them and all of that sort of. So I got sat on my bed and I had all of the books and leaflets and pamphlets that I'd possibly got, and I'd got them all open to different pages. So different sets of questions, one for this, what if this comes up? Well, I'll open that book over there. And I must have had, I don't know, 12, 15 different books all open around me. And this person called, I answered the phone. I didn't look at a book once because what they were talking about had nothing to do with any of them damn books. There was nothing. And I just remember sitting there going, right, what the bleeping hell am I going to do here? And actually, once I'd got past that and went, right, so these are not going to help me. I've just got to help myself here.
Yeah.
I just settled into listen to what they're saying, ask them questions to understand at a deeper level what they're saying, and then let's see where we go from there. So that first session was an hour long of them talking about what their problem was,
yep,
and me asking to understand at a deeper level what their problem was.
Yeah.
The second session, they came back 2 weeks later and said something along the lines of, I don't think anybody's ever listened to me like you listened to me in that first session.
Yeah.
Way back then, I didn't have the understanding of things like the trainings that we do about the language of fear and stuff like that. So I didn't hear their language of fear. But just the fact that I'd sat and I'd listened and I'd asked the right questions at the right time to understand them deeper, gave them a sense of, oh, this guy actually wants to listen to me. This guy actually wants to understand. And that's half of the battle won, because then there's trust. So that was my first client. I still remember to this day, the bed was filled with all these books. And I didn't use one of them. Not one of them did I use. But I suppose at least I was prepared.
So what would be the best way for us to help anyone saying, all right, I've got imposter syndrome? All right. The first thing I'd say is, look, you don't have imposter syndrome. It's a label we're looking for. You don't have anything. You're creating it. So for anyone listening to this, they'll be like, oh my God, I've said I've got imposter syndrome. I've got that feeling. I'm not. What's the quickest way to coach that person off the podcast? This is what you do.
Okay, I'm gonna answer that question with a question. Here's what I'd say that you consider, and I'm not just talking to you, I'm talking to everybody who's listening. Is imposter syndrome real? Or is it just a made up bunch of BS
belief systems?
Is it a made up bunch of belief systems that make you think that somebody's labeled this? Because let's be honest, 10, 12 years ago, I'm not sure I'd heard the term imposter syndrome. All of a sudden, it's become this cultural phenomenon, and I say that with hands raised because I don't really get it. Imposter syndrome isn't real. All it is your mind saying, are you sure you can do this? Are you good enough to do this? But what if you can't help? What if you can't do this? And the what ifs start coming, and you say, well, what if I can? What if I can help? What if I can do this? So ignore the fact, the terminology imposter syndrome. It's a crock of sugar. It really is.
A crock of sugar?
Crock of sugar. Listen, I don't want to swear on the podcast, okay? It's
a crock of sugar. I don't get it. How is it a crock of sugar? Would it not be a crock of shit?
Well, it would be a crock of shit, but I didn't want to swear on the podcast. All it is a label. It's a label, just like so many other labels that we label ourselves with throughout our lives. Some of them can be good labels, but some of them are harmful, detrimental labels. And I'm afraid imposter syndrome is one of those labels. I remember, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, I was driving somewhere and I was listening to Radio 2, which for those of you who are abroad is BBC Radio. And they were discussing this on one of the shows about imposter syndrome. And they had a psychologist on there explaining all of this stuff about imposter syndrome. And I couldn't call in because I was driving, and I was desperate to call in and say, look, let me tell you the truth about imposter syndrome. And the truth is, it is just a label. It's just your belief systems kicking up some fear, trying to convince you that you're not good enough. And the best thing about fear is that it's an alarm clock to tell you you're on the right path. So if you have imposter syndrome, keep going because you're on the right path, because all it is fear.
Yes.
I can hear a but coming.
No, there's no but, because what I was going to say is, if anyone listening says, right, Cuddy, I want to come to you, I'm like, right, don't come to me. I'm going to ask you a question. I would ask you if you were my client. What would you do if you didn't have imposter syndrome? Oh, well, I would do this. Perfect. Do that for the next 7 days. What? Yeah. Do that, what you just said, for the next 7 days, and then we'll come back. Oh, but I've got... No, it's not the question. If you didn't have imposter syndrome, what would you do? This is what I'd do. Boom. Do that for 7 days, then we'll talk. That's what I would do. For anyone listening, if you think you've got imposter syndrome, ask yourself the question, what would I do if I didn't have the label?
Absolutely. And that goes for anything, doesn't it? If you didn't have a fear of not being good enough or a fear of not being loved, what would you do? It's a bit like when people blame resources for not moving forward. Oh, well, I don't have the money. Well, if you did have the money, what would you do?
Yeah.
Well, I do this. And the list of stuff they come up with, let's say they come up with a list of 10 things that they do. My betting is 5 of them won't be related to money whatsoever.
Yeah.
So go and do those 5 things.
Yeah.
You know, it's a great question. Whatever it is, oh, I've got a fear of doing this, or I'm scared about doing this. Okay, if you weren't, what would you do?
Yeah.
Okay, go and do that. You're absolutely right. Go and do it for 7 days, 14 days. Go and do it for 3 months, because by the end of 3 months, you'll have built such a strong habit, you'll just do it naturally anyway.
Yes. No, I do like that. Yeah. So what other labels are flying around there that would trigger you, Graham?
Trigger me? Do you know what? Trigger is one of the labels that really... A trigger is a label. I saw a great post on Facebook the other day. It said something along the lines of, I'd like to introduce you to a new term called glimmer. Glimmer is the opposite of trigger. So when trigger makes you flare up, a glimmer makes you smile. So instead of having triggers, have glimmers. And I really like that, because all it is it's changing one label to the next. So anything that triggers you, just imagine it's a glimmer and it's going to make you smile. And I really like that.
That's very good, actually. That's very good.
Yeah.
Yes. I've always...
So what labels are about there that...
Go on.
I was going to say, what labels are out there that bother you? Because I'm not going to use the word trigger. The glimmer you.
I remember Mel Robbins. It was something Mel Robbins that I saw on just a quick clip, and she was like, whatever triggers you is probably something you should be following. Triggers are good. They're a good sign that you need to work on that. So if it's jealousy, find out what you're jealous. It's not the person. Don't project your stuff onto the person. Why is it? It'll be something you want. A trigger is probably something that pisses you off because you haven't got it. So we can create the trigger of this person makes me jealous or this person makes me angry. Actually, no. The person triggering you is not the problem. The problem is we've not worked on his triggers. You work on your triggers, that'll go away. That puts you back in control. Realizing that triggers are there to help you move forward. That's what I had to do for the triggers. So I wasn't projecting my stuff on other people, which is important because a lot of people do project their stuff on other people. And that's really actually unfair. In all fairness, I think I saw something. It's like, that's a lack of emotional maturity on your part if you're going to keep saying, well, this triggers me and that's their fault. No, that shows a lack of emotional maturity on your part, that you should be listening to something. I do. I still get triggered, and I do look for glimmers. The glimmer is I've had a trigger. That, you're absolutely right. That's the glimmer. That's something that maybe I should look into. That's a weakness on me that I need to work on. That's how I use triggers now.
Yeah. To quote your good self, that's a me problem, not a them problem.
Correct. And it's something I have had to repeat on myself, because I'm not a fan of triggering people. But then again, the glimmer comes up. Actually, maybe they need to get triggered so they can move forward. Those triggers are a good sign. They are the glimmers. I'm gonna be using that an awful lot. Your triggers are your glimmers. Ooh.
It's just a shift in perspective. And actually, if you're getting triggered by somebody, what you need is a shift in perspective, because it means that they are something along to the lines of who they are or what they value is in conflict with who you are or what you value. So if you shift your perspective and you open yourself up to who they are and what they value, you might just learn something.
I did that. Do you know what? I actually had to do that. I had to do that with one of my ex superiors. And I knew he was a nice person. And I was like, what is it about him that just triggers my insecurity? And I came home, and it was because I've always, in the past, had the belief that I wasn't very smart. So I've tried really hard to learn, read books, so I can become smarter, to have that knowledge that, no, you've overcome lots of things and I can be smart. And I am smart because I learn. But if I don't know it today, I'll learn how to do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And there was one superior that I worked with, and we just did not see eye to eye. And I had to sit in my chair in the man cave and go, right, what is it? Because I was getting lost in thought, and I was getting lost. I'm like, what is it? Is it this? And I asked, no, it's not that. Is it this? No. Is it this? No. Is it because he's arrogant? No, it's not, because he's not arrogant. I know he's not arrogant. Is it? And it was because I felt he knew more about my job than that made me feel insecure, because I'm like, I should know that. I should know the answer to what he's asking me, and I don't, and I'm blaming him. And that was never fair. And I did reach out to him on LinkedIn a while ago and said, I hope we can have a coffee and stuff like that. Because it was a me problem. See? It was a me problem. What that trigger became a glimmer. And the second I'd gone through that and realized and had that aha moment on my own, I'm like, there it is. It all just left my body, and I'm like, yep, so I've got to work on becoming better at my job, smarter, so that I can ask better questions.
So I'm going to take you back to something you said. Is there a better definition of being smart than, if I don't know it today, then I'll go and learn it tomorrow? What a definition for being smart. Smart is not about how many qualifications or certifications you have. It's not about how many degrees you have, or A levels or O levels or high school diplomas or whatever. Smart is about recognizing what you don't know and then going and trying to learn it.
Yep.
So is there a better definition of smart than, if I don't know it today, I'll go and learn it tomorrow?
I will have that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good. So that's possibly one of the easiest and best ways to get past imposter syndrome, or the label, is to have that. We get caught in stories. I'm sure we've rattled on about this loads of times, but we get caught in stories, and that's the BS that we have. And I think, because I know that the next podcast, we've already named it, is overcoming our own BS. And when we say BS, we mean belief systems. So do you think we've covered imposter syndrome and shone a light on it for what it actually is?
I think so. I think when people realize that it's just a label, then surely you can just untie that label from the luggage that you're carrying around and throw the label away. Because that's all it is. It's a luggage label, isn't it? It's like going on holiday and you've got a label there that says you're an imposter. Well, just take the label off and then attach a label that says you're awesome, you're great, you're fantastic, you're good, you can do this. Whatever it is, write a new bleeding label and attach it to yourself and get the old one, rip it up, throw it away, set fire to it, let it burn into ashes and disappear off. Because that's all it is. It's a label.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're good.
What was your label that you had to overcome?
Not good enough. 100% not good enough. I had the absolute belief for a long time that I wasn't good enough, no matter what I would do. And from the discussions earlier in this podcast, you probably guessed where that came from. It came from my parents.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I blamed them for that.
Yeah.
However, I'm mature enough and know enough now to understand that they might have imparted that belief into me, but it's my responsibility to recognize and change that belief. And listen, and I love this quote. This quote really did change my perspective on responsibility, because also responsibility is the ability to respond. And we all have the ability to respond. It's just how we choose to respond. So we can all have responsibility because it's nothing more than the ability to respond.
Oof.
There you go.
Yeah.
What was your label that you had to overcome?
Not worthy. It wasn't not good enough.
No.
Actually, I'm honest about that. No, I've always known I'm good enough because I've gone for everything that I've ever wanted. And I know when you look back and you really do get into it, I have manifested everything I've ever wanted. And I think that's really important. Even the dog. Do you remember Frankie?
Oh, I know Frankie very well.
I'd said to me and my wife had been talking about it. I said, I'd like a dog before March, and then we get a whole summer out of it. And I think we said that in October. And then we forgot about it. Then Carol started looking at a few dog homes and things like that, because we always wanted to like rehome a dog and stuff like that. And then April came along, and then Frankie arrived, and we were like 2 days later, we had a dog in his house, and I was walking around the field going, I manifested this literally to the date.
Yep.
Just a few weeks out, I said, yeah, maybe March time we want a dog. So that's when the weather starts changing. Oh, holy moly! Oh no, it was March. It wasn't even April because we had him 3 weeks before his birthday. It was March, and I'm walking around with a dog going, literally ask and you receive.
Yeah. It's scary what we can do when we, and I'm going to put this in a very strange way, we're scary what we can do when we don't put our minds to it. Now, there's a reason I say it like that. This scared the bejesus out of me at the time. So I wanted to set a goal for when I would reach 100,000 students on Udemy.
Yeah.
Or out of the Priority Academy in general. I wanted 100,000 students. So at some point I set a goal and I set a specific date. And then I forgot about it. And I don't mean I just tried to forget about it. I genuinely forgot about it. So I was happily going along, creating courses, blah, blah, blah. And then it got close. It got close to 100,000 students. And I was watching it day after day. And a few students are dropping here. And then the day was coming. And I could see that it was going to be that day that I was going to get 100,000. So I kept watching. I kept flicking back in and I kept watching. And eventually it ticked over. There was 100,000 students. The very next day, I got a calendar reminder that I'd set that day to have 100,000 students. I hadn't a clue that I'd set that day in my calendar reminder. I knew nothing. Well, I obviously did know something about it, but I'd completely forgotten about it. Somehow it was one day out. And that alarm went off the next morning. I went, what the hell's that? And it scared the bejesus out of me, because imagine the power we have to set a date and then go and achieve it if we just believe we can, but forget about it and let happen.
Remember when I said we again, going back to manifesting, because it's not until you actually realize, oh no, I did ask for this. The good and the bad, in all fairness. And I remember I joined a networking group, and it said put down your goals. So I just put down the goals of creating a coaching company where I was coaching other coaches. And then I had to go in and change the details. You know, when we changed the name of the business.
Yeah.
And I'd forgotten about my goals. And then I went back into the goals and I was like, oh, I actually said I wanted a coaching company where we coach coaches. 6 months? Wow, unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely.
You see, and I use the word unbelievable. What a
Yeah.
terrible word to use. You've just literally, no, believable.
Yeah. I think we could do a podcast on manifesting. I'm feeling another podcast on manifesting, particularly for kind of in the coaching area. I'm feeling that coming.
Ooh. Are you
Write that
manifesting?
down on your list.
You manifesting?
I'm manifesting a podcast about manifesting. I like it.
I love it. Perfect. Well, look, thank you very much for another one of your mind management mentors posting podcast.
Post it. Podcast. Cuddy.
Podcast.
It's the
The
podcast. It's
mind
not
management mentors.
That's a post it.
The mind management mentors. I think this is episode 3. Anyway, it's on YouTube. Look, thank you. Genuinely hope you've enjoyed this. Tune in for the next one. We're going to try and do one every week. I think we're going to try and do one a week, aren't we, Graham?
We certainly are.
Absolutely. And wherever you are from, whether it's the Priority Academy or whether it's from YouTube world, we hope you enjoyed the podcast. Put in some comments. You're more than welcome. If you've got any questions you want us to answer, just put them in the comments and we'll put them into a podcast for you. We're here to help and get you moving forward however you want to coach. All right. As always, big love from Cuddy and
big look from me.